If I can invite Diane Carlson of the Pacific Science Center. Welcome, Diane, to the podium. Thank you.
Well, good morning. As you mentioned, I'm Diane Carlson from Pacific Science Center in Seattle. And I also add my welcome, a very special welcome, to all the newcomers, the first-timers at the GSCA's very first Filmmaker Symposium. And I guess what I and my panel will do, we're the devil in the details that Paul spoke about earlier. So we're going to be here to put some meat and bones and flesh onto how programming decisions are made. And so we hope to demystify at least a little bit the mysteries of programming. Now, because the giant screen community is diverse, the objective of the program is again to provide some insights into how exhibitors choose the films that they program. As Paul referenced earlier, in the early days of our industry, there might only be 2 films a year. So the programming decisions were really quite simple. And in fact, the basic model had been, and again, we're focusing on institutional theaters and the documentaries. The basic model had been, for many theaters, an A-B model, where the film would play for 6 months as the A film, and then would transition into the B film for the next 6 months when the new film came up. Now, there are still a few theaters that use this model and use it very successfully, and one of those is Mike Day's theater at the Science Museum of Minnesota. So again, there's a lot of diversity in the industry. But now there's an ever-increasing number of choices. There's the 40-minute films, the 20-minute documentaries, feature films, live sporting events, and arts events. And the shift to digital technologies will actually make those choices unlimited. Now, there was always a mystery on how programming choices were made. And there are about 280 giant screen theaters, and I guess we could save a lot of time, Tammy, if I just said there's 280 different ways that the programming is done. Thank you very much. But I don't think that'll be particularly helpful, so we'll try to go into a little bit more detail. And as you also heard Paul say, that about 61% of the institutions that were surveyed or replied on the survey say that there are more than 3 or more people involved in the decision-making process. Now, this is radically different, especially for those of you that are new to the industry, than the commercial film world, where you can have one person that is programming hundreds, if not thousands of screens at a time. Now, as a community, I think we're very polite, and I think our politeness sometimes has led to some confusion on the part of filmmakers and distributors. And I'll give an example of what I mean. You know, there's a screening and a potential exhibitor comes out and they run into the filmmaker and they say, "I loved your film. It was great. I really, really enjoyed it." And they walk away, and the filmmaker, producer, distributor thinks, "Great, there is a potential lease." But that's not the way it always works. Here's an example of that I witnessed, directly on this. I left a screening of a natural history film on lions, and I met the CEO of a museum in the lobby afterwards, and he was telling me how much he enjoyed that film. It was really, really wonderful. He enjoyed the whole thing. I asked him, "Will you play the film?" And he said, "Oh, no. No, it doesn't match our mission. We're a technology museum. We would never play that film," okay? Then I thought about it, and I thought I remembered he was playing The Lion King. So I asked, "Aren't you playing The Lion King right now?" He did not reply. He walked away. Luckily, I wasn't the filmmaker of the Lion film. So the giant screen world can be challenging and confusing. There are some aviation and aquarium museums that might only play films related to their topic. Yet, one of our aquarium colleagues told me the other evening that Space Station has been amongst his most successful films. So this morning we are fortunate to have a panel of speakers who represent very diverse programming approaches, and the plan is that they will bear their souls on how their theaters get programmed. And in addition to being diverse, they are very smart and experienced. In fact, sitting up here before you or standing, you have over 100 years of giant screen experience in the panel. Now, here's the format. I've made my introductory comments. Each speaker is going to speak for about 7 minutes. They're all trying to do the math, figure out how long each of them have been in the industry. I will introduce all of the speakers now and to make it a little bit more efficient. We have Toby Winsett, IMAX Operations Manager at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Toby works with staff input on selecting films, and for his most recent fiscal year, he played 10 documentary titles and no DMR films. So he's our pure documentary representative. We have Andy Z from COSI in Columbus, Ohio, who's the VP of Operations and Experiences, and his responsibilities include the National Geographic Giant Screen Theater and the Planetarium. And like Toby, they do not present any feature films, but he is expanding his content with alternative programming. Tim Hazlehurst is the VP of Operations and second-class plumber at the Marbles Museum. Given all of his expertise, I think he should have at least used first-class plumber in his title. He is a tremendous asset to the association as well as the museum. Now, at his Wells Fargo IMAX theater, he showed 33 documentary titles last year, 23 feature films, and 130 alternative programs. Now, that is one busy theater. He's also probably with the only children's museum, at least that I know, that shows R-rated films. So again, speaking to the diversity of our group. We're also delighted to have Zarth Bertsch from the Smithsonian. He was able to escape the East Coast winter and join us, and of course no one is probably more delighted than Zarth about that. He's the Director of Theaters at the Smithsonian. This includes the Einstein Planetarium and 3 IMAX theaters. His IMAX theaters hosted over 2 million guests. I believe that's a figure I heard last year. 4 theaters averaged 3,530 presentations each last year. Now, Zarth gets to work with a scholarly scientific committee that reviews the films, and currently is installing one of the next generation digital laser IMAX systems. Our final presenter is Paul Wild, a great colleague to the north of us from Seattle. He is in Victoria, BC. His IMAX Victoria Theater is located inside of the Royal BC Museum. Now, Paul does it all. Last year, he played 12 documentary titles, 10 new DMR titles, plus a return of the Polar Express. He does an annual film festival, and he alternates digital and film projection. And now we'll go ahead and start with Toby.
Hello. Okay, I'll try this one then. I'm going to sit down because I have a short 1,200 slide PowerPoint that I'd like to present. It will only take a couple hours, and I hope you just sit back and relax. What? Oh, no, never mind. My name is Toby Winsett. I'm the IMAX Operations Manager at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and we have a 413-seat IMAX digital theater. We converted back in 2010, so we're coming up on our 5th anniversary of running digital. Last year, we ran 10 documentary titles for the year. We have 53 shows a week. We do lectures and things like that in the evening, so our alternative content doesn't really show films of that nature. During our week, we'll show anywhere between 3 to 5 different titles, which limits our show schedule, limits the number of runs we can do for any title. I would like to thank the GSCA for putting on 2 conferences a year. They are very important to us. Amanda and I attend, and it's these conferences that allow us to see the content that's being produced and then make our programming decisions or set that wheel in motion. So thank you everyone that makes the films. Thank you to GSCA for putting them on for us so we can come and see them. We schedule several months in advance. Currently we're looking at August of this year. We have our schedule set until then. We do advance reservations for school groups and other different reservations, summer camps and the like, and they're calling us about 6 or 8 months in advance to make these reservations. So we're trying to make decisions that are long-lasting and way down the road. So like I said, we're here to pick films that will open up in the fall. We come and we watch pretty much every film unless we're running it on our screen at the current time. And from those films, Amanda and I will be the first filter. We'll pick a half a dozen of them and we'll compare notes, and we'll decide to ask the distributors to please send us a copy so that we can evaluate the film in our own theater. It's amazing to me how different some of these films look at one of these conferences, and then you bring it into your home theater, the difference that can happen just by a venue change. So we bring it into our theater and we ask our selection committee to come and view the film. Our selection committee is made up of various departments throughout the museum, including our marketing department and development, membership, our programs. Sometimes we have a curator or two. Occasionally there'll be a vice president that'll be invited. And it's these people that give us their input on your films. After the film is completed, we'll sit down for about 15 or 20 minutes and do a little roundtable discussion right there in the theater. We don't move anybody. And we take their suggestions, their ideas, what they think of the film in total, and all these things, and we record them, and then we'll sit down, Amanda and I, and we'll go over all the discussion that we had. So Amanda and I are basically the head of the committee, but the committee has a great driving force for us to whether we bring in a film or not. Now, one of the best things is if we have a traveling exhibit coming into the museum, and when you have a traveling exhibit and you have a film that goes with it, it's a no-brainer. We, don't even really need to go to the committee for a selection, because it's going to be, oh, we've got the robots exhibit coming in. Well, are we going to run the robots film, or are we going to run something else? And history shows us that if you run a film that goes along with the exhibit, it's going to do well. Once our committee looks at it, if we're still kind of questioning the outcome of that, occasionally we will present the film to the public, and we will do free public screenings. We'll take a couple of our non-showtime time slot areas, and we'll present the film to the public. It's free of charge, but they must complete a survey for us. And once they complete the survey, then we will accumulate those and then decipher the information that we pull off of the survey to see what the public is telling us, which may be completely different than what our selection committee is telling us, as Paul pointed out in his presentation earlier. Then once we get all that, we'll sit down and we'll rank the films, and we'll try to figure out what would fit best in our museum, if it goes well with a traveling exhibit, a current exhibit, or some other activity that may be coming up in the near future, and also if it is presentable to our audience, if we feel that our audience would enjoy the film. And we're a family or organization, like most institutions are, so we're trying to program for people that are 3 years old, and we're trying to program for folks, their grandparents that are bringing them, the 90-year-olds. So it's a wide range of topics, and not one single film usually will fill all the topics or all the categories that we want. So I wish I had a magic dartboard, if you will, so we could say this is exactly how we pick the film. We pick it exactly the same way, and we do different strategies, but it varies from film to film and from year to year. And but once again, I'd like to thank the GSCA for providing these expos for us, and the filmmakers for making such wonderful content, which actually makes our decision making harder. So thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going to go to Zarth.
All right. Diane asked me to come and discuss the vetting of the science through our scientific committees. There is really a varying process by museum. I always try to summarize the Smithsonian as it's a bit like our country in that you have the castle, which is the federal government, and then the states, or the museums are the states. They each have their own administration, their own processes, their own curatorial staff, of course, and we have to go through each given film by discipline. And it can be quite a process. And one of the things that I always recommend to filmmakers, and of course, it is not a requirement, you're the filmmakers, who am I to tell you, but if you are willing to share your script very early in the process, it makes a big difference because we can help clear any barriers that may really become locked once the script is locked and narration has been recorded, and that can be very challenging. So one of the things that we really try to do is make Jonathan's joke to demystify. He asked if we would not mystify it, but we will demystify it, is the scientific vetting process. And one of the things that is not always obvious to a lot of the filmmakers is they will hire leading scientists in the field, and these scientists are truly excellent at what they do. Their credentials are everything that they are, but that does not mean that there's always a consensus in every given scientific discipline. One of the things that we have dealt with, particularly at the Natural History Museum, is that there might not be a consensus between our Natural History Museum and the one in London on a given topic. And then if you get into air and space, particularly more cutting-edge theories or more contemporary theories, there also may not be consensus between leading scientists. So it's one of the things that we have to try to vet from that standpoint as well. One of the other questions that we have also received quite consistently is how much scientific content that a film needs to have. There frankly is no minimum. There are titles such as Big and Digital's Watermelon Magic that might have relatively little scientific content from the standard that take a full dome show like Dark Universe, which is about as dense in scientific content as you can get. So perhaps both of those could be examples of opposite ends of the spectrum. So it's not about the quantity, it's really about the quality and making sure that it passes our vetting process. Let's go through my notes here. I thought I was going last, so I was. Let's see here. Also, DMR. With regard to DMR, it does not have to go through our scientific vetting process. Obviously, nearly 100% of DMRs would not pass that process. The way that we draw that line at the Smithsonian is DMRs have to play after 4 p.m. on a daily basis unless they can be positioned as mission content. And there are rare exceptions, Star Trek or, in this case, Interstellar, and the way that we crossed that bridge is with Star Trek, we have the original Enterprise model from the original TV series in the 60s, so that becomes the potential for mission content. When it comes to something like Star Wars or in Interstellar, with Interstellar we brought the Ranger spacecraft out, I should say movie prop, more fun to say spacecraft, out and did an exhibit and a virtual reality experience when we launched that film, which allowed us to cross it into the paradigm of mission from being non-mission. Star Wars, we have artifacts in our collection. So that is how we address DMR as far as that is concerned. And I wasn't really asked to comment on anything other than the scientific vetting, but I guess from a selection standpoint, I would comment that we're always trying to find the best possible balance between content that, again, vets our scientific committees, but also really has commercial value. I mean, our biggest mandate with Smithsonian Enterprises is to generate those precious unrestricted dollars that the museums need. So when you have a title, for example, Watermelon Magic. We clearly didn't select that because it was the most science-dense title that we could have selected. We selected it because there hasn't been a lot of programming in this industry available for small children, and we thought that it'd be appealing to families. So so that was foremost, frankly, a commercial decision for us, a ticket sales-driven decision. Also, I want to touch upon, from a content standpoint, you have air and space versus our natural history content. There are a few exceptions where we can cross the bounds of the core content. Jerusalem is a key example where we had to go through the curatorial vetting process on that title for natural history. It's not an obvious fit necessarily for a natural history museum, but it's one that we believed had excellent content and great commercial appeal for our market as well as the tourists. So in the case of that title, it was important for us to have the curators weigh in and vet any content that they were able to vet. And then other than that, there was a bit of debate about the fact that there is cultural and religious content there, and being at the Smithsonian, we have sensitivity around that. Ultimately, we proceeded, and it was a successful title for us, but that would be an interesting exception to, again, core content, which is why I also referenced Watermelon Magic. Then there is the occasional title that we have to vet with committees at both museums if we're trying to show it across the board. One of those examples would be Tornado Alley, which we actually showed at Natural History as well as Air and Space. And that title is not necessarily a core title from a content standpoint for Air and Space, but again, it was a commercial decision and one that made sense and fit certain disciplinary aspects of both museums. Really, I wanted to also open it up to some questions because I've received a lot of questions at the conference about the vetting of our scripts as well as our programming criteria in general. So I don't know, are we doing all questions at the end? Okay. Well, that is all that I had to present.
And now we'll turn it over to Andy Z.
So we go from Z to Z. I like that. Doesn't happen very often. I'm Andy Z from COSI in Columbus. We're a science center, but some would argue we're more of a children's museum. 80% of our member households have children under the age of 12, so our programming opportunities are not only for general public, but for families. Our film selection process, well, let's see. I guess we'll look at some slides first since we made them. Oh, one other thing, for those of you that have been with GSCA for a long time, normally sitting up at a podium would be one of our colleagues, Chris Hurtubise, who's our Senior Director of Marketing. I will preface my statements by saying she is the holder of all knowledge related to the giant screen at COSI. I will do my best to channel her thoughts and information and answer whatever questions I can. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today. She is standing by, though. She said I could text her if I get any questions I can't answer. Call a friend. So at present, we have Giant Screen Theater. It's the National Geographic Giant Screen Theater, which we converted in May of 2014. COSI is 50 years old. We just finished our 50th celebration, but we have been in our current building, what we still refer to as the new building, for 15 years, 16 now. Opened in 1999, and at that time, they opened up a giant screen theater. It had an 870 iWorks projector. For those of you that know, the content was somewhat limited. And in May of 2014, they retired that and went digital. And then in June of 11, they went digital, and then in May of 14, we upgraded to 4K. It's a 375-seat auditorium. We have a decent size screen, and our core business, as everyone else up here pretty much, is documentary content. Also, in 1999, when the building opened, they transferred a planetarium from the old building to the new building. The old planetarium had an old Spitz star ball, and they moved over to the new building. And in 2004, COSI was going through some severe financial challenges, and they closed the planetarium for financial reasons. We reopened the planetarium just in November of this past year with a full dome system provided by Evans and Sutherland. We have 2 4K Christie projectors front and rear, 211 seats, full dome, all that stuff. You can see it up there. So our programming guidelines, not much different than most of the other folks up here. We do try to open up about 4 new films a year, roughly around the season changes, spring, early summer, fall, and then winter to capture our holidays. We run roughly 2 films at the same time. Occasionally we'll have 3. Mostly 3D, although that's not mandatory. We run 6 shows a day on the hour, starting at 11 o'clock. As you can see, they run about 4 to 5 months. We also have been experimenting over the last couple of years with evening series films and winter series and a couple other things which I can answer later. And our planetarium, which is only a few months old, gives us the opportunity to do some things that are a little different. What we have decided, and of course this is still a work in process because we're very new at running 2 digital theaters, is that we wanted to provide something for our family audiences with little kids. So right now we're running Big Bird's, whatever it is, Crazy Adventure, which has been selling really well. But the major component of our digital dome, our planetarium, is of course the live Sky to Night shows. That's what's drawing most of the folks in right now. And what we've decided, at least for the present, is that we are going to play space-related content as our third choice. So right now what we're running is 2 live shows, 1 or 2 children's shows, and we'll be opening Wildest Weather in the Solar System as our first feature. On those days when we don't run 2 children's shows, we'll add another live show. So that's all my slides. I'll talk a little bit about our process. It's pretty similar to, didn't want that one yet, but that's okay. Our process is very similar to Toby's in that we have multiple selection committees. Chris or I generally go to conferences, and we go back with all the feedback from the films that we've screened. We take them back to our what we call our planning committee, which is all of the directors in the building, and we present the ideas, and they look at it. They don't make decisions at that group, but they just kind of look at it for future planning, and we discuss where it might tie within upcoming exhibits or other special events. We start to do some film testing. We do peer review for films that have already been running in other venues. Our in-house research and evaluation team starts to do key art and title testing with our audiences. And we invite all team in our building to screenings. So we do ask all distributors to provide us with screening copies. And similar to Toby, we ask everyone who sees the film to complete a survey. And the survey is fairly extensive, and we get a very high rate of return. But by doing so, we get representation across all areas of the organization, from team that work on the floor to volunteers to our contract partners to folks from Ohio State University that work in the building, all the way through our senior staff. It gives us a pretty good feel for what folks are looking for. The final decisions are made by a film screening, or I'm sorry, a film selection committee, which is populated by members across the organization in key areas: early childhood learning, programs, experiences, marketing, exhibits, guest operations, and probably a bunch of other folks I'm forgetting. They actually make the final decisions. We don't take it to senior committee, we don't take it to the board or anything like that. That team actually makes the decisions based on the feedback and the information that we've gathered through all these other processes. So, challenges and opportunities. Go backwards. We now have two digital venues. Our flat screen has been relatively flat over the last few years. We felt that by opening our planetarium, we would see our attendance and our revenues plummet in the giant screen theater. Fortunately, they haven't. We're not sure why they haven't, but we're thrilled that they haven't. But we now have the challenge of maximizing the revenue and the audience participation in two venues, so we're still learning how to do that. The third point up there is, and I know this is sacrilegious to some, but we are exploring other opportunities and looking at putting alternative content on both screens. We don't know what that means yet, because again, we're kind of new in this process, but what we're finding is that unfortunately we don't think that traditional film content is going to grow our business. It'll help us maintain, so we have to look for other opportunities. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a Z in my name, the last name there. That's right, Hazlehurst. I'm Tim Hazlehurst. I'm with the Marbles Kids Museum in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm the VP of Operations, and amongst other things, I work very closely with our teams as it comes to film selection for our theater. Tammy, I don't know if you want to jump to the next slide. That's just kind of a bullet list of what we are and how we came to be a children's museum, exclusively a children's museum that happens to have an IMAX theater as well. We are in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina. There are several other museums close by to us that are state supported, one of which has a digital system as well that shows documentary, shorter length documentary content, 20-minute movies just up the road from us. We opened in 2001 as a 1570 3D IMAX theater. That was when we were associated with a completely different museum at the time. We had, and we still have a 70-foot wide screen, 52-foot tall system in the theater with 272 seats. We bill ourselves as the largest flat screen in North Carolina. No one has actually contested that yet, so hopefully I'm not pulling the wool over anybody's eyes, but that's what we are. In 2007, the museum that we were affiliated with effectively went out of business, and we merged with another museum in town and became Marbles Kids Museum. And at that time, our audience demographic skewed from what was a middle school and late elementary and middle school audience at the museum skewed in 2007, went way younger, all the way down to 0. So Marbles Kids Museum really is a kids museum. Most of our attendance ranges from literally age 0 to 10, not your typical documentary film-going audience, certainly not down at the low end anyway. And in 2011, we converted to IMAX Digital because we relied pretty heavily on Hollywood content for our afternoon and evening and weekend programming. And being a small market, we were starting to see that there were certain Hollywood films on 1570 that we couldn't get because we were such a small market, and it was hard to get to convince folks to strike a print for us, literally. So we switched to IMAX Digital in 2011. And again, as it says there, our programming includes documentaries and first-run Hollywood movies. One of the things that we pride ourselves on at the museum and at the IMAX Theater are our award-winning Learning Lab school programs. The GSCA recognized us with several awards a couple of years ago for our Learning Lab programs, which were out of necessity. We developed these Learning Lab programs to help continue to drive attendance to the theater because, again, our audience demographic was so young. They weren't coming to the IMAX theater for field trips because that wasn't something that their teachers we're interested in. So in order to continue to have late elementary and 6th and 7th and 8th grade and even high school audiences come see us at the theater, it was hard for teachers to justify a field trip for a 45-minute documentary. So we added these learning lab programs to our repertoire, which extended the visit for these kids to be able to come for a 2.5 hour visit to the institution by coupling a 45-minute documentary with an hour long or an hour and a half long learning lab that went with it. So that really helped us maintain and build our audience back up for our documentary group audience. We see now 450,000 guests a year at the museum. We're one of the top 10 destinations in North Carolina for field trips. And on top of that, because the audience is such a different demographic, it's almost like a separate line of business in some ways at the theater. We see another 160,000 on a low end and 200,000 on the high end guests a year at the theater. So you can add those together, and we do well over 600,000 guests a year at the campus across those two venues. And again, we're quite possibly, in our minds, we have small minds, that one of the only children's museums with an IMAX theater, giant screen theater, that's exclusively children's related sort of content. So next slide. Diane asked me to talk about the mystery of programming as we do it, and it's certainly not that mysterious in that it seems to be what a lot of people do. We have a film selection team. There's more than 3 of them, actually. That's me there in the middle. But we have a film selection team that's made up of folks, representatives from marketing and guest services, operations, floor host staff at the IMAX theater, and our educators, who are a really important part of our selection team because, again, because we rely heavily on documentary content that is going to be easily tied to our learning lab programs and vice versa. Our school groups need something that we can build a learning lab for as well. So our educators are really key to our film selection process. Next slide. We also look at tons and tons of data on a regular basis. That's just one little snippet of a spreadsheet that we put out on a weekly basis. They make me do it weekly. I'm not sure why. But we also look at some time-tested topics that work really well for us. And I think in some of Paul's sampling earlier, you could see that some of the high-end content that people really liked was Born to be Wild, as for instance, baby animals, space, humpback whales, which is underwater, anything that's baby animal or animal related, outer space related, ocean related, and science related. And of course, we would like to think that Avatar is also science related. It has to be good content. It has to work well on our screen. So those are some of the topic areas that work well for us. We also do title testing with our audiences and with our staff, again, like Andy does, like Toby does, and Zarth does, and everyone probably does, is we title test, and we also audience test content to see what our folks think. And we also require our attendees to do surveys as well, because that's a really important part of maintaining that sort of momentum and being able to get good information from our teams. And at the end of the day, we throw a few darts at the board and we pick the films that we're going to screen at our theater. And much like Toby does, we are generally, it used to be we programmed a year out. Sometimes you would ask me today, a distributor would say, what's your next slot? 5 years ago, I said, I'll talk to you next spring when I've got a slot available next fall. But now we're programming a lot closer in. My next slots are this fall, pretty much. So we because the content comes at us so quickly and the opportunities do, we tend to draw it back in a little bit. And then Diane asked me to talk about how much R is to R. We were able to get a very short screening run of Game of Thrones, and we wouldn't even have considered it had our audience not sent us about 1,000 emails and called us every other day asking us if we could get Game of Thrones. So we were able to work it out on a very short, just evenings only run. So that worked out for us, and we were able to do that. Other titles such as American Sniper, 50 Shades of Grey, and some of the other R-rated content would have required us to run those on a much longer schedule each day, and we just couldn't justify it. We needed to be able to maintain our family-friendly venue in such a way that, although I would like to have seen 50 Shades of Grey and American Sniper. I can still see them, right? I can go see them at Andy's showing them, I think, down on the Dome. So anyway, so that's how much R is to R. So yes, we have shown R-rated content, but on a very limited basis. So that's what I have.
Good morning. Paul Wild from IMAX Victoria. We are, as Diane stated, we are in the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, which is on Vancouver Island, West Coast, Canada. So we are generally regarded as a small market. The population of that market is about 327,000 in the last census. And we are in a destination, so we balance our programming with visitors and tourists which come to Victoria and Vancouver Island with our local market. Our base attendance is probably in around that 350,000 mark. We go up from there depending on the strength of the exhibition and a film pairing that we might be able to put together with our host and partner, the Royal BC Museum. Our high water mark was over 500,000 when we did a Titanic film exhibit pairing. But we settle in around the 350,000, and of that, as you can see on screen, we have a local program, an annual pass program in Victoria of what we call IMAX annual pass holders, which is, as of just last week for this calendar year, is sitting at 19,400. Those are local people that buy an annual pass for the year, and those are not museum members. Those are purely IMAX theater engaged customers. And so a lot of our programming is based around that group and how we look after them and what we feed them. To enable us to do that, next slide please, Tammy, when we opened in '98, we were a 2D flat screen, and we stayed that way until May of last year. So we bypassed the 3D film system, fortunately in a way. At the time I felt like I was missing out on something, but we rode past that. And just May of last year, we installed a digital IMAX system alongside our film system on a rail. So we can play both content now, and that has enabled us to not only sustain our attendance, but also to grow it as well. So we now offer primarily 2D film documentary content during the day, and then we swap over to the digital system in the evening, and we offer a 3D documentary title about 6 o'clock or so. So you can see, you have a choice on your documentary. You can see it in 2D film during the day or in 3D digital in the evening, and then we play second run DMR or Hollywood content in the evening. Of that 350,000, about 50,000 is Hollywood content or Hollywood attendance in the evening. So we've really looked at the equipment choices at the moment as an enabler for us to sustain what we are doing. It also helps us, next slide, Sammy, to manage really the industry transition, because we feel like we're in no man's land. In some ways, there are some digital titles that are not available to us. So we can't play them, but we know we can sort of keep those in our back pocket and pick them up later. And what I mean by can't play them is because we have a digital system, we cannot alternate between a film system and the digital system during the day on a 1-hour turn. Although the systems sit on a rail and they're mobile with calibration and whatnot, they're too cumbersome to move back and forth. So we can't play, for example, Jerusalem 3D digital every sort of second or third hour and then run another film in film. It just doesn't work. So what I mean by not being able to play digital content necessarily is films that are only released digitally, we're kind of shoehorned into the end of the day or first thing in the day before we use the film system. However, keeping the film system alive enables us to access some of the library content. Museums and institutions are still booking in exhibits that don't have digital film content to complement them. And so, just for example, last summer, the exhibition was Vikings at the Royal BC Museum, and we were able to pick up the 15 perf Vikings print. Of course, there's no digital copy of that, and play it alongside the exhibition. And this summer, there is a gold exhibition at the museum, and we are playing an older IMAX title called Gold Fever, which again, if we were fully digital today, we would not have that opportunity to do that. And when we can capitalize on a film exhibit pairing, it makes a huge impact, not only from a guest satisfaction point of view or visitor experience, but also from an attendance point of view. We can also have some fun by dipping into the library of films for IMAX, 15 perf, and have film festivals. And so we can, while we have the film system, we want to be able to keep it as long as we can before we make that step over to a full digital conversion. And then the question that I'm asking myself, which will be probably January, February next year, will there be a compelling reason to keep film at that point, and the operating costs that come with that, and the skilled labor to run that type of equipment versus a digital system, which I can run. It's very straightforward. In terms of programming overall for the course of the year, we're looking at the documentary titles, but we look at this, what we consider to be the strong documentaries that are being released in that particular year, and try to pace them out. So my preference is not to put two strong titles back to back in the same part of the year. We may know through coming to these conferences and expos that there's a certain title that's going to be released at a certain time, and we may also choose to not open that title. For example, if it was being released in April next year, we may not actually release it in April. We may hold that back and play it at another time. So over the course of a calendar year, we'll have some strong, what we consider to be strong titles, content-wise, entertainment-wise, and pace it out. And then we'll fill in the gaps with what we might consider to be B films per se. We also balance that with, we don't want too many ocean films, so we generally won't open an ocean film that will end, and then we open another ocean film. So we try to keep ocean and nature, science, and those nicely sort of balanced throughout the year, so we can complement our schedule, and then our customers sort of get into a bit of a routine and see the year through. And then, as I said, we put in a film festival just to change it up a little bit. But that's essentially, I know it's not scientific, but honestly, it's gut, really, in terms of programming. You have to know your audience, your local market, and it's really having a feel. And I come to these conferences just from a budget point of view, often by myself, although sometimes I bring my wife, and she's a great second opinion. But I go back to talk to my group of people, and in this day and age, through sharing with Vimeo and things like that, to be honest, I actually hate showing my group in Victoria a Vimeo of a large format film, because it never does it justice. But at least they can see content and so on. And then as a group back in Victoria, or we might get a test DCP or a test print even, and we'll just run it and get a sense of where we're going to play it. So but it's a lot by feel. It's a bit of an art, really, as opposed to looking at lots of numbers. To be honest, I don't look at a lot of numbers. You just have to know your audience and know the strength of the films and the filmmakers that you're dealing with, and play them where it makes sense. Thank you.
Step out of my moderator role and join the panelists with a few comments about our theater, just give it a little more variety, and then we'll go to Q&A. A few really quick guiding principles. The major one is it a true giant screen experience? There can be some very fine films, but if they're not optimal for the theater, then that is a major concern. So we really want to highlight giant screen experiences. Will it generate revenue? And will it generate revenue in the short and the long term? And what I mean by that refers back to the first statement I made. Will people want to come back to our theater because of the film they saw? If we have a film that's weak and is not maximizing the giant screen experience, they may not return. So that's why it's both short-term and long-term revenue. We are willing to take risks. Some of you that are familiar with our theater are already aware of that. Since some new people out in the audience, I will mention it. In 1988, we were the first theater to sign up for Stephen Lowe's film Beavers. And that's a film we still showed last year. So that's another comment for any new theater people. There are some excellent library films that you can bring back in our evergreen. We were also the first theaters to sign up for Stevens' Titanica film in 1992. This is an interesting historical point because no institution wanted to show a film that was 90 minutes long. And again, a lot has changed since that time. We have feature films now that are close to 3 hours long. So, but again, that was a big issue at that point. We took Rolling Stones to the Max. And again, we're one of the early theaters to do that. That's the only film that's gone to our board of directors for approval. Now, the board's concern was that the audience was going to tear apart the theater. They saw theater seats being ripped apart because they would be so excited about the film. And I never told Andre Picard nor Di Roberts that, but somehow I assured them that the audience was slightly older and not quite as enthusiastic as they thought it might be. We were one of the first theaters to take DMR or the feature films. We just started with Fantasia 2000 at the turn of the century there. We also took Doom 3. For those of you that are not familiar with Doom, it is the first IMAX Indian production. It was our first Bollywood film, and we have a mission or objective to diversify our audience. Being in Seattle with so much technology, in Microsoft we have a very large Indian community. They came out in droves. That was a real experiment for us. And if any of you have never seen a Bollywood film, I would recommend that as a great starter film. So, and also like some of my other colleagues, we're going to try Watermelon Magic as a programming for younger audiences. We also like pairing films with exhibits. We will bring back films that we've played in the past if they tie to an exhibit, like Mummies, Secrets of the Pharaohs with a Tutty exhibit. We brought back Greece to go with Pompeii that we're showing right now. Like Paul, we're able to show film and digital in the same theater. So thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists, and my apologies to our panelists and all of you in the audience for the challenges that we had with the technology. I'll take responsibility for that. Somehow my thumb drive got scared and wouldn't play. Now, we'll go ahead and open the floor up to questions. Joe.
I'm going to say something that IMAX won't like me saying probably, but you have to calibrate the digital system, and we do that in the morning first when the theater is dark and there's nobody in it for obvious reasons. Then we move it out of position, and I describe it as gently, because of all the little mirrors and whatnot inside, and we set it over to the left and put the film system into position. So we've done the calibration in the morning, we've parked it, we're running film, and then in the evening, we can swap over on a 1 hour turn. So if we finish our last film, 1570 runs at 5, for example, it ends at 5:45, the GT comes back, the digital systems gently move back into position, and then we run the digital film at 6. Now, we're not supposed to move the projector, the digital system. We're supposed to keep it in place, but we have not experienced misalignment issues, so we're able to continue to do that. And 3D is misaligned anyway, so if we'd gone out by a degree, we would have, you probably wouldn't notice. But even with 2D titles, we've been fortunate, and so far it's working for us, and we just do it from a customer service point of view, because there is no way with double feature tickets, and our annual pass holders are sitting in there at a 5 o'clock show, or for example, the 6 o'clock Jerusalem before the 7 o'clock Interstellar on film, or whatever the case might be. There's no way we can ask them to leave during the calibration. So that's why we kind of have worked it in that way. So it's a long story, Joe, I'm afraid, but the short answer is 10 minutes.
The question was, how long does it take to go between showing in 1570 film and changing to digital? And I want to echo Paul's comments and also use it as an opportunity to encourage everyone to talk to all of your colleagues about questions that you may have. I talked to Paul about this question because I had the same concerns, and I followed his great footsteps, and we also do that calibration in the morning and then do the churn with a short time period. Daniel. Repeating the question, some of us show films in the same title in 2D and 3D. And the question is, what performance difference have we seen in that situation? Who would like to take the question?
My experience, Daniel, is we don't increase attendance necessarily by offering both choices, but by offering a choice, you have better customer service, I believe. So for those that would really like to see Jerusalem in 3D, they find the time slot where it's playing in 3D and they go and enjoy it. For those who want to see it in 2D, and I should just briefly describe that the 2D film system that we have fills the 61-foot by 85-foot screen with image. So it's a 2D image, but it's giant and immersive. The 3D version is, of course, the sort of 16:9 aspect ratio, but has 3D. So it's really just, it's a customer service effort on our part.
In Denver, we only show them, if they're 3D films, we only show them in 3D, but it's one of our complaint areas from our customers that we're not offering it in 2D. And when you have 4 titles during the day, you have 7 time slots. It's very difficult to say, okay, the 11 o'clock show is going to be the 3D version while the 3 o'clock will be the 2D version. You're always going to have the people in the afternoon that wanted to see it in 3D and vice versa. I've been talking with IMAX, and I'm trying to convince them to make me a set of, say, 1,000 2D glasses. So I wouldn't have that problem. I could offer a 2D glasses to anyone coming into any 3D presentation and they could see it flat. And honestly, I've tried this. I've done testing. And over the past 3 months, I've had over 200 people take my makeshift little 2D glasses, and they come back and they're just ecstatic that they can go to any film they want and see it the way they want to see it, because they hate 3D. And in that way, my customer service is going up. Now, when I talk to IMAX about it, they say that I'm the only theater that has requested such a thing. So if you, in theater owners, if you want to try it, give Chris Appleton a call, and I want him to be inundated with it, because when they say, well, only one theater is doing it and you're only getting a few hundred people, I'm trying to satisfy the entire audience coming in. So I hope that answers that part. Anyone else? Zarth?
Very briefly, one of the things I thought was particularly interesting with Jerusalem is that older demographics, and we received a lot of groups for that film, absolutely would not see it in 3D. They truly would not want to see it in 3D, so it was really critical that we offered it in both versions. Younger demographics only wanted to see it in 3D, and that was one of the splits that we saw, which I think is a fairly obvious split to most of you. One of the other things that was interesting in this was unfortunately the result of our aged natural history projector being down for 24 hours. We had to show all of our films in 2D for 24 hours, and the anecdotal feedback from the staff is that The domestic tourists, frankly, did not care and felt that we retained 100% of them. We have a lot of Chinese tourists, and the anecdotal feedback from the staff is we lost 100% of them when we were in 2D.
And much like Zarth, we made the decision to show Jerusalem for its main run in film, but in 2D, because again, we knew it would be a more advanced audience. And also with that film, there were so many gorgeous aerials. I felt that that would do just fine, and it did. So that was our decision with that particular film. The other thing is, in our market, the commercial theaters are now starting to show the films in 2D and 3D. And the Cinerama, which is close to us, they're a single screen theater, they have 2D Tuesdays because they have such demand for films. They only have one screen in non-3D. We do not choose to show the same title in 2D and 3D on the same day because it would just get too confusing at that point. Now, Tammy has asked that we maybe take one more question in here. We will then have lunch next door. She will try to have, no, I'm sorry, then we'll have a program, sorry. We can ask more questions during lunch next door after the next segment. Is there one more question? Yes. Okay. The question is for Tim Hazlehurst for more detail and explanation on the learning labs which accompany the documentary films.
Thank you. This microphone made its way down here. We developed, as I said, the learning labs as kind of out of necessity. It was that or probably stop showing documentaries altogether because our teachers weren't coming for our documentaries because their principals wouldn't let them take a 2-hour bus ride to come see a 1-hour movie to take a 2-hour bus ride home. So we rely pretty heavily on the educator guides that come with the documentaries, and because we build these learning labs, we try to get our hands on those educator guides pretty early on in the process when we start to license the documentary to come onto our schedule. So for all of you guys that are producing and distributing content documentaries, don't forget about the educator guides because for theaters like mine, and I'm sure other theaters have other reasons to use these guides as well, we rely really heavily on these educator guides. And we take into account that we have a great educator team on staff, many of whom used to be teachers in K-12, especially middle school teachers. So our concept of the learning labs is it's a deeper dive into the movie that allows the teachers to, and we do charge a little bit of extra as an upcharge for our learning lab. It's a documentary for a school kid is $4.50. If they want the learning lab, the teachers want the learning lab, it's a $2 upcharge for the learning lab. So we do charge a little bit because there's a fair amount of effort that goes into creating these things and programming them and scheduling them and booking the rooms for them and so forth. But there's usually a PowerPoint presentation that goes along with it. There are tables spread out through a large room where the kids go from table to table and they dive into different topics associated with a certain movie, whether it's Lewis and Clark or Island of Lemurs or Forces of Nature. We did a really neat program with Forces of Nature. We partnered with one of the local TV stations and one of the local weathermen who is very big into Forces of Nature, as you might imagine, did a nice little introduction video for us that we inserted into the PowerPoint at the very beginning. So the kids get to see that. After they see the movie, they come to the learning lab and they get to see a local weather forecaster tell them a little bit more about what they're going to learn in the learning lab. So they go from station to station. They learn about meteorology, they learn about earthquakes, they learn about volcanoes and whatnot, all the different things that are associated in forces of nature. We don't do a learning lab for every title because, quite frankly, some of the documentaries that we book we know are not going to be group-centric sort of titles. They're great movies. We didn't do a learning lab for Jerusalem, for instance. It's a great movie. We brought it in. We killed it at the box office, but we killed it with seniors and adults and not school groups. So we didn't build a learning lab for Jerusalem.